Episode 13, The Breaking Point. The sanctuary had reached a breaking point. It was no longer just a hidden refuge, it was becoming something much larger. More people arrived daily, some desperate, others seeking purpose. They came because of the stories, of Caleb's words, of Samar's defection, of Aarav's transformation, and of something deeper, an unseen force moving beneath it all. But with growth came pressure. Resources were strained, tensions simmered, and whispers of war grew louder. Gabriel wasn't ignoring them anymore. And Caleb knew they couldn't run forever. One morning, Caleb gathered a group near the river, his expression heavier than usual. "We can't stay isolated anymore," he said. "Gabriel's influence is growing, and people out there are looking for something beyond its control. If we wait too long, we'll lose our chance to reach them." The sanctuary murmured in uneasy agreement. Caleb turned to Samar, Aarav, and a few others. "I'm sending you out," he said. "Small teams, no weapons, no force, just truth. Find the others, tell them what's happening here. And listen, we don't just bring a message, we need to understand what they're facing."
Elias, standing on the edges of the group, scoffed. "You want us to walk into Vesla territory with nothing but words? That's suicide."
"It's risk," Caleb corrected. "But truth doesn't spread by force. It spreads when people see it for themselves." Samar and Aarav nodded, already preparing. Others hesitated but slowly stepped forward. They knew Caleb was right. Waiting meant death. The teams left at dawn. As the teams scattered across the landscape, a different conversation was unfolding deep within Vesla's headquarters. Donovan, Gabriel's lead strategist, stood before a massive screen displaying real-time data. Heat maps of movement, intercepted messages, anomalies in their predictive models. The sanctuary's presence was more than a blip now. It was an anomaly the system couldn't compute. Sitting behind him, watching the screen with sharp eyes, was Chairman Harrow. The unseen architect of Gabriel's rise, Harrow had maintained a low profile for years, letting the system do its work. But something about Caleb Ford, about the sanctuary, had drawn his attention. "This movement," Harrow said slowly, "has no leader, no doctrine, no clear objective. It should be collapsing under its own contradictions." "It should," Donovan agreed, "but it's not. And that's the problem." Harrow leaned forward. "What do they believe in?" Donovan hesitated. "Something we can't measure." Harrow exhaled sharply. "Then we destroy it." Back at the sanctuary, the problem became clear. There were too many mouths to feed. Malcolm stormed into a meeting, slamming a ration report onto the table. "We have weeks of food left at best," he said. "More people arrive every day. We either turn people away or we start starving." Zach looked at Caleb, waiting for an answer. But Caleb didn't speak right away. Instead, he stood and walked to the edge of the camp where the refugees had gathered. Women, children, families clinging to each other, eyes hollow from hunger and fear. He turned back to the group. "We don't turn them away." Malcolm let out a harsh laugh. "Then what? Pray for food to fall out of the sky?" "No," Caleb said. "We trust that there's enough." His certainty was maddening, but no one had a better plan. So they rationed what little they had, stretching portions thinner, preparing for the worst. And yet, the worst never came. Despite the dwindling stockpiles, despite the constant arrivals, no one went hungry. People shared. Those who had more gave to those who had less. Fishermen who had long abandoned their trade set up nets in the river. Foragers found roots and berries in places they had never thought to look. A former Vesla technician repurposed an old food synthesizer. The supply never grew, yet somehow it was always enough. No one could explain it, but they all felt it. One night, Zach and Caleb sat by the river, the firelight flickering between them. "This is getting bigger than us," Zach said quietly. "People aren't just coming here to escape Gabriel. They're coming because they believe in something." Caleb nodded. "I know." "And that doesn't scare you?" Caleb was quiet for a long time. Finally, he looked at Zach. "I think this ends with me." Zach felt a chill. "What do you mean?" Caleb exhaled. "The system isn't afraid of movements, it's afraid of symbols. If this keeps growing, they won't just come after the sanctuary. They'll come for me." "You don't know that," Zach said. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. Caleb smiled faintly. "I do." Days later, Caleb, Samar, and Aarav hiked deep into the mountains, seeking a vantage point to scout potential sanctuary expansion. As they climbed, the air grew still, thick with something unseen. At the summit, the world seemed to shift. The sky deepened, the stars brighter than they had ever seen. And for a moment, just a moment, Caleb felt it, a presence. Not the weight of leadership, not the burden of fear, but something beyond it, something greater.
The others felt it too. Samar exhaled sharply, eyes wide. Aarav fell to his knees, shaking his head. "What is this?" Aarav whispered.
Caleb didn't answer. He couldn't. He only knew one thing: whatever was coming next, it had already begun. When they returned, the sanctuary was in chaos. A group of Vesla operatives had infiltrated, attempting to take one of the defectors back. A fight had broken out, and a young boy had been caught in the crossfire, unconscious and barely breathing. Samar acted first, stabilizing the boy. Caleb knelt beside him, whispering something no one else could hear. Moments later, the boy stirred, his breathing steadied, the camp fell silent.
And then someone whispered, "Did you see that?"
Rumors spread. Some called it luck. Others swore Caleb had done something beyond explanation. Elias, watching from the edges, muttered, "This is getting out of hand." But deep in the sanctuary, away from the whispers, Caleb sat alone, staring at his hands. He had done nothing. Yet something had happened. And he knew. Gabriel would not ignore them any longer. Caleb gathered the leadership that night. "This isn't just about survival anymore," he said. "Gabriel is coming. We have to be ready." Malcolm clenched his jaw. "What does that mean? War?" "No," Caleb said. "It means choice."
People began shifting in their seats, uneasy.
"I won't force anyone to stay," Caleb continued. "If you want to leave, leave now. Because from this moment on, there's no turning back." The room was silent.
Then, one by one, people began to rise. Not to leave, but to stay.
And the sanctuary became something else. A movement, a revolution. And for the first time, Caleb knew how it would end. And he wasn't afraid.